That's a dynamic mapping task. So before this, already we have developed the dynamic mapping, right? So how we can make the mapping dynamic? So parameterization is one of the way of making the particular mapping dynamic, right? So why we do the parameterization? Anybody can tell me the benefits of parameterizing the asset? Why parameterization is so important?
With the help of parameter file, we can easy to change the value of parameters.
So it provides us the kind of flexibility and dynamic nature to your asset, right?
Yes.
We don't have to go to the particular asset every time and change the values of parameters like this. So if you parameterize directly without touching your asset, we can pass it from the parameter file and we can achieve the whatever results we want. Okay. So like that with the parameterization concept and that already we are aware. Okay. So the next approach or one of the important approach that today we are going to discuss is nothing but dynamic mapping task. Okay. So my screen is visible, right?
Yes.
So we'll discuss the point wise. Now, introductory part, like why exactly we need the dynamic mapping task. So some of the introductory part already we have discussed. That's why I've given you the scenario and we have done the discussion on that. Okay. So we'll discuss the what exactly is the dynamic mapping task, then how to configure it, then what are the different parameters at the dynamic mapping task. Then there are some new point or concept in the DMT like jobs and the job groups. What exactly this? Okay. So these points we'll discuss. Now scenario already I have given you like and already we have discussed that key consider scenario where you have to move the data from several tables into the database into the table from source to the target, where target can be a flat file, or you can also have the target can be the database also. Both the source and target can be also the database also. But here we are considering the scenario as what? We are loading the data from number of tables. I just given you the example of 5 or 4 tables, but there can be a multiple number of tables at the source level, and that from the source level database we are loading it into the flat file. Okay. So one of the way that Anjali mentioned that one of the way of doing it is by building the mapping for each database table, and in the mapping you choose the database table as a source, configure the target file and its properties, and build the mapping configure task using the mapping, right? So for example here in the this current slide you can see we are considering the 4 mappings and the 4 mappings. So the problem with this approach is that what here I have mentioned, the problem is what? The problem with this approach, we are replicating the same mapping logic. There is a no change in the mapping logic. Okay, mapping logic is what? Simply simply take it from the source and load it into the target. So mapping logic is same. So the problem with this approach is that we are replicating the same mapping logic for each and every table, and the number of assets we are developing are going to be more, right? So there will be with this approach, there will be for example, if you are loading from the 4 different source tables, there will be the 4 different mappings and 4 different mapping tasks. So total, how many assets will be there?
Eight assets.
Total 5, 4 plus 4, there will be the 8 assets. So there is a no issue in this approach. Means if you think in uh, in the perspective of correctness or incorrectness, this approach is correct. Only the thing is what the development effort that you are going to require, as well as the processing time that you are going to require. So that will be definitely will affect the what you can say the efficiency of this particular job, right? So then we come to another approach. The alternate approach is to build the parameterized mapping by parameterizing the source and target transformation So this way there will be only one mapping, right? And we can configure the source and target details inside the mapping configuration task built for each table. We'll parameterize the mapping, source target, as well as source object, target object, and we'll connect that, we'll configure that mapping within the 4 different mapping tasks. Okay. So as compared with the previous approach, here our development effort is increasing or decreasing?
Decreasing.
So definitely decreasing, because in previous approach we have to develop the eight asset. Here only we have to develop the 5 assets. Okay. So this is slightly better as compared with the previous one, but still, as I said, we are ending with the multiple mapping tasks. We have to go for building the or developing the 4 mapping tasks. Okay, for the same parameterized mapping. So, so there comes the idea of dynamic mapping tasks. Okay, so here I have mentioned the best possible approach to this requirement is to build the parameterized mapping and use the dynamic mapping tasks. Okay, so what exactly that dynamic mapping task? So that we'll see. So in the dynamic mapping task, you can define the multiple jobs with the different source and targets. Okay, so in the dynamic mapping task, if you use the approach of dynamic mapping tasks, we'll end with building the only one mapping and only one mapping task. So in case of the first approach, we have to develop the, for example, if you're considering the 4 tables you have to load, so we have developed the 4 mappings and the 4 MCT. In second approach, we have developed the 1 mapping and 4 MCT. And if you use the dynamic mapping task, we can achieve that with only one mapping and the only one mapping task. Okay, so definitely this approach is better than the previous 2 approach, correct? So out of these 3, which one is the better?
Dynamic mapping task is
Dynamic mapping. So how exactly it works, that we'll see. Okay, how to configure it and how exactly it is better as compared to the previous 2, that we'll see. Okay. So as I mentioned, so if you use this approach, we'll need only the 2 asset, 1 mapping and 1 dynamic mapping task. Okay, so let's see the details about this, how exactly we can do. Okay, so in the dynamic mapping task, there are the 2 important, what we can say, the features are there, or the what we can say, the techniques are there, like concept of jobs and the concept of groups. Okay, here I have mentioned the dynamic mapping task allow you to create and group multiple jobs within a single asset that process the data based on the whatever the logic we have mentioned in the mapping. Okay, so if you use the dynamic mapping task, instead of creating multiple mapping tasks, you can configure the multiple jobs based on the mapping which we have developed. Okay, so here your jobs will act as a mapping when you configure it within a dynamic mapping task. Okay, like in the mapping, what we have done, we have parameterized the source object, right, and target and the target object, right? So if you use the dynamic mapping task, this option we can get it at the dynamic task level only, and this option we can get from the which feature, the jobs. We get the job option in the dynamic mapping task, and in each job we can parameterize the source, target, and their respective object also. Okay, so reducing the number of asset from 8 to 5, then 5 to 1 or 2. So that is nothing but the one of the feature of the dynamic mapping task, and that is the one of the, what you can say, the betterness as compared with our previous 2 approaches. So here I have mentioned a dynamic mapping task reduce the number of assets that you need to manage if you want to reuse the parameterized mapping. Now, when this approach can be used, when the mapping logic is same in all mapping. Okay, whatever number of, whatever number of mapping flows are there. Okay, if the mapping logic is same, then we can go for this approach. Okay, instead of creating the multiple assets, okay, multiple mapping and the multiple MCT. So if you find the scenario like this, mapping logic is same, right? Then you can go for the dynamic mapping task. Okay, and you can reduce your development effort. So we'll see the demonstration below. So we'll take one simple example. Before that, we'll just see the some theoretical part, what exactly these things are there. So when you are developing the mapping, simply we'll parameterize the source connection. Okay, which hold your source connection value. We'll parameter the source object. These things already you all of you are aware. We'll parameterize the source object. The parameter, the source object, this will hold the source object value. We'll create the input parameter for this source connection, source object, as well as for the target connection and the target object or the target file name. So target connection will hold the parameter of the parameter value of your target connection. Okay, and we'll also parameterize the target objects also. That will parameterize the our flat file of target also. Okay, so we'll see the stepwise. Okay, theoretically first, then I will show on the trial account also how we can create this kind of things. So these are the first step is what defining the dynamic mapping task. Okay, so defining the dynamic mapping task is simply like before this also you must have created the mapping task. So in the similar way, we can create the dynamic mapping task also. Okay, so let me take you to the. Okay, my screen got changed, right?
Yes, Vikas.
So you can see I already created one mapping, simple, just source and target I have taken. Okay, ODS source and flat file target. Okay, then I have defined these 4 different input parameters. So source ODS connection, flat file target connection, source object and the target object. Okay, then now you can get the different option to create the dynamic mapping task. So like if you click on these 3 dots, here you're getting the name mapping task. So this is our general mapping task. If you click on this, here you'll get the option as new dynamic mapping task. Okay, so all of you can see this is your dynamic. So you can give the whatever name you want to give it. Okay, for example, like give it as a okay, so I have given it as a name as dynamic mapping task test one. Okay, select the runtime environment here. So this is the general part. Okay, so same thing I have mentioned here. Configure the below properties in general properties area, like give the name of my dynamic mapping task project folder. Now, these are all the things you all are aware. Okay, set the mapping. Mapping get automatically selected when you create it from the this by clicking on the 3 dots option. Okay. Next, second, so this already we have done. We have followed these steps in order to create the or in order to define the dynamic mapping task. Okay. Now configuring the dynamic mapping task. Okay. So as I said, we'll get the parameterization approach here, and we can parameterize the things whenever you go to the now see. So first, this is clear general things. If you click on the next, now here you can see whatever the parameters you have defined here in the input section, that all the parameters will reflect here. All of you can see, right?
Yes.
Source connection, source object, target connection, target object. Okay. So same thing I have mentioned in the slide. So parameter page list all the parameters defined in the mapping that is configured in the dynamic mapping task. Okay, so whatever the mapping you attach with the dynamic mapping task, so whatever the parameters which is part of your input parameter, which are part of your mapping, that all will get reflected in your dynamic mapping task parameter section. Okay, parameter section tab. Okay. Now after this, you need to define the parameter scope and the parameter value for the parameters. Now what there are two types of parameter scope in case of the dynamic mapping task. Okay, first is what default, and second is the local. What is the default parameter scope? The parameter value you define will be copied to all the jobs. Okay. You can also override the value when you configure the jobs. Okay. So default in the sense, here you can see, here you can see the parameter scope section. Here by default, the local scope is selected. Okay. So what is the local scope and what is the default scope? Default scope is what? If you select the default scope option here, like let me select the default. Okay, so if you select so it is clear that there are two scopes, the default scope and the local scope. So if you define the default, the parameter value you define will be copied to the all the jobs. First understand these things. Okay, so I have selected here the default scope, right? Now here I will select some parameter value here, source connection. Okay, so I will select the Oracle. Okay, then for the source object, I will select any source table. So I have Oracle database. So I will select the region table. Then target connection, I have the FFTGT flat file. Okay, and target object, I will give you here like T A B C D CSV. Okay. So now when I will click on the next, okay, now next section is what? Job section. Okay, as I mentioned, this job section act like your mapping. Okay, now in the job section, you can see first in the job section, you can see the first part is related with the jobs and second part is related with the groups. Now I want to add one job here. Okay, so if you want to add one job, you just click on the plus button. So you can see job one get added, right? And its parameter type also get, we can see it is getting reflected here, as well as you can see the parameter values are also got reflected, right? All of you can see.
Yes, Vikas, we can see.
Okay, so this is when you select the parameter scope as a default option. Understood? Default in the sense whatever value you are defined declare at this parameter section here, and all will be copied when you create the job. Same I have mentioned here. The parameter value you define will copy to the all the jobs. Now we have created the one job. Now let me create the one more job. Okay, if you want to create the one more job, just click on the plus button. You can see here also all the values of parameter get reflected here. Okay? All of you can see. Second job and its parameters along with the values.
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So that is the meaning of what? Default value, parameter scope as a default. The parameter value you define will be copied to the all the jobs. Okay. Now here you can also see some other options like enabling the jobs and disabling the jobs. So if you disable this, now this job will not run when you run the dynamic mapping task. Okay. So it's very important to enable this option. Okay. So we have understood the parameter scope as a default. Okay. Now let me make it local for some parameter and default for some parameter. So I will make it local for objects, source object and the target object. Okay. Now when I will create the job, I will get the value for default parameters, but I will not get the value for local parameter scope. Let's see. Now let me remove this and recreate. So see, you can see the parameter scope for the source connection was what? Default. That's why we got the value which we have defined in the previous parameter section. But if you see the source object and the target object, source object and the target object, the parameter scope is what? Local. That's why you cannot see the its value. If you make it as a local, okay, you can define its value here. Okay. Now, for example, now let me select the source object region and flat file name. Okay, so we are creating at the runtime. Okay, so local is what the parameter value must be assigned when you configure the job. That is the local parameter scope. Okay, so all of you understood the parameter scope, local and the default. In the default, we have to define the value of parameter value here only. If you make it as a local, you can define its value in the job section, right?
Yes.
So parameter scope is clear, right? So we have the two parameter scope, the default, where the parameter value you will define will copy to the all the jobs. Okay. Now even if you define it at the here, okay, here you have defined the default value of parameter, and you want to override it. You can also override it also. Okay. You can also overwrite in the job section also. Like you can select another also here. So same thing I have mentioned here. Okay. That is the important part of the dynamic mapping task. That is the configuring the parameters. So in the parameters case, we have the two kind of parameters, the default and the local. Okay. So I hope this point is clear. Now let's see the job section part. Okay. Now in the job, you can see we have created one job, we have enabled it, and we have assigned some values also. Now, as I said, our job just like act as your mapping, correct? Because in the mapping, what we have done, we have created the four parameters, and for that we are passing the value at the MCD level. So same thing we are doing here. This job one is like your one mapping, correct? If I add the job two, this is acting as your another mapping, right?
Yes.
But difference is what? Here our development effort is getting completely reduced as compared to your previous two approaches. This is this is right, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so here, just for the sake of understanding, we have created the two jobs. Now here I can select another database table like location I have selected. Now here I will check. I will give the other file name. Okay. Now, as we have discussed in the scenario, four mappings, four tables we have to load. So I will create one another jobs also. Here I will select another table like department. Here I will select the dev.cs. Okay, and I will create the fourth job also. Now you can see we have created the 4 jobs. Okay. Now another thing that we have to do here compulsory is you have to associate the particular job with at least one group. Okay, here you can see the group option is also reflected here. Correct? You can see here in the jobs, we have the option to associate or connect your job with particular group. Okay. Now, for that purpose, we have to create the group here. So if you just click on the plus button, you can see the group one get added. You can give the name to this group, whatever name you want, like our first job is related to the region. So you can give the name as a region, for example. Region, other is location. Like in shortcut, you can give the option DAPT. Okay, so this is the group you have created. Next thing is what you have to put your job or you have to associate or connect your job with at least one group. Okay, this is the compulsory thing. If you don't do that, your dynamic task will remain invalid only. So as soon as you create the groups here, you will get the option here to choose the group. Like only one group we have created, so that's why only one option we are getting here. If you create the multiple group, you will get the multiple option. Okay, so this is clear. Jobs and the groups.
Yes.
So job is like what? It just act like our mapping where you can add whatever number of jobs you want, and there you get the option as like parameter type, parameter name, and the option to add the value for your parameters. Okay, so here there is a no limit on creating the number of jobs as well as there is a no limit on creating the number of groups. So you can replicate your mapping logic here multiple number of times by creating the multiple jobs as per your requirement. Okay, suppose if you want to load the data from 10 different tables into the different flat file or the database tables, you can create the 10 different jobs. Now there is no need to create the 10 mappings and 10 mapping tasks and doing all this development effort. So that is nothing but the specialty of the dynamic mapping tasks. Okay, now same we are discussing here also while discussing the concept dynamic mapping task here dynamic mapping tasks allow you to create and group multiple jobs within a single asset. So same thing we have done, right? We have created the multiple jobs, okay, and we have applied the logic. So dynamic tasks allow you to create and group multiple jobs within a single asset, process the data based on the data flow logic defined in the mapping. Now, for all the jobs, the logic is same, right? The logic will be what? Whatever the logic you are defining this mapping, the same logic will be get applied for all the jobs. So same we have mentioned here. The dynamic mapping tasks allow you to create and group multiple jobs within a single asset that process the data based on the whatever the data flow logic defined in the mapping. So instead of creating the multiple mapping tasks, we can configure the multiple jobs based on the same mapping in the one task. So same we have done. Instead of creating the multiple mapping and the mapping tasks, here we have configured the same thing by creating the multiple jobs and the single group. This is clear, all of you?
Yes, Vikas.
Okay.
Yes, Vikas.
So these things I have put in the PPT also, which already we have discussed how to configure the dynamic mapping task. Then what exactly the parameter scope is there? What is the meaning of parameter scope as a default? What is the meaning of parameter scope as a local? What exactly meaning? These things already practically I have shown you. Okay. Then what exactly is the job? That also we have seen. The job is a single run of mapping, as I said. So just act like you are mapping, single mapping. The job is a single run of mapping that the task is based on. So dynamic mapping task can include the multiple groups of job. For every job, a different set of parameter value can be configured. Okay. Now, if you want to select the different database here, I don't have any other database than Oracle here. Okay. So if you want to select the other database, that also you can select here. right? For 5 different jobs, if you want to select load the data from 5 different database, that also you can do easily. Okay, same thing I have mentioned here. For every job, a different set of parameter value can be configured. For each of these job, you can configure the different connection, you can configure the different source object, you can configure the different target connection, as well as you can configure the different target object also. No need to create the separate mapping for all these kind of things. Okay. So the same thing I have shown you there. So this is a slightly different example. So here they have created the 2 jobs. Okay, job 1, job 2. They have associated the group 1 and group 3 like this. Okay, but I already shown you. So job, now group is what? Set of jobs. So simply I can see here. So only one group we have created, and the same group we have attached to the all the jobs. So your job group is what? Is what? Exactly the simply the set of jobs that you can run concurrently. Okay. So likewise, you can create the multiple groups if you want, like this. Okay, but so you can do the more research on this. So we are just seeing the one group and 4 different jobs here. Okay. So as I mentioned, the groups run sequentially, and all the jobs in the previous group have to be complete before the next group begins. Okay. Suppose you have created the 4 different groups. Okay. Likewise. So once the first group will get completed, then the next group will start. Okay. Likewise, sequentially, one after the another. If you want to switch the order of this group, you can switch the order also. Like you want to take the group 2 on the first position, likewise you can take. Okay. So same thing I have mentioned, the groups run sequentially, and all the jobs in the previous group have to be complete before the next group begins. Suppose in this our group, there are how many jobs? 4 jobs. So until and unless all these 4 jobs will get completed, your next group will not start. So likewise, the same thing I have mentioned here. The groups run sequentially, all the jobs in the previous group have to be complete before the next group begins. So we can set up the multiple groups, and accordingly we can assign the groups to the particular jobs. So as I said, there is no limit on the number of jobs and the groups that you can add to the dynamic mapping task. You can enable or disable the groups also. For the groups also, you can get the option here, enabling them, disable. Okay, so as per your requirement, you can do these configuration changes. So job setting already I told you, like by clicking at this plus button, you can add the job. By clicking at this plus button, you can add the groups. Also, if you want to add some pre-processing command, post-processing command, that also you can add. Okay, also stop on option is also there. Okay, you can try all these options there. Okay, stop on error or stop on warning. Okay, so these all the things we can configure here. Also, advanced session properties also we can configure. Likewise, you can see here. Now this kind of property we used to get at the MCT level, right? So same kind of things we can also configure here by referring the this setting section. So So this is regarding the configuring the dynamic mapping task job setting, and use the setting of the job. You can add stop on error, stop on warning. You can add the pre-processing, post-processing command also. Okay. So now one thing that is I didn't see in case of this dynamic mapping task. So okay, after this, now you can click on the next button. Okay, here you are getting the runtime option, like whatever now this here options are limited, right? You can see as compared with our mapping general mapping task. And one thing that is getting missed here, which is still I think under the research of Informatica Cloud, that is parameter file option. So we are not getting any parameter file option for the dynamic mapping task. So this is very important thing. Okay, you can keep in mind. So we don't get any parameter file option for the dynamic mapping task. So next, if you click on the save, So you can see it get validated. You can see it's valid, and we have got the option to run this dynamic mapping task. Okay. So before we run it, I just want to understand anybody is having the doubt in whatever the things we have discussed regarding the dynamic mapping task.
Yes, for the flat file where we need to mention the formatting of.
So here, if you go here, now here we are creating at runtime.
Okay, great.
So here we are not getting any option here if you are parameterizing it. Okay, for formatting purpose.
Okay.
Only the runtime option we are getting. Okay, we need to do more research on that. I also not checked that. You can do more research on that where, because here, if you see at the mapping level, here we are parameterizing it. So here also will not get any option to what you can say the formatting options. If it is hard coded, we'll definitely getting the options, right? So that is the one point that we can research further regarding the if you use the flat file as a source or target. Here we are not getting any formatting options. Another. So what is the one thing that we must be sure that the parameterization of mapping is very important if you want to use the dynamic mapping task. Is it correct? Right? If you don't do the parameterization, will not able to achieve the whatever result we are supposed to achieve using the dynamic mapping task. Is it right or wrong?
Yes, because parameterization is
Yes.
important.
So parameterization is most important thing.
Yes.
Next important thing is what you must have at least one job for at least one group. Sorry, and at least one group, not all. That is the another important thing. So these kind of questions, I think in the R41, I have seen these kind of questions. So those who have given, they must be having this dynamic mapping task is there in the R41 certification. So another important thing is what you must have at least one group and the at least one job, and your job must be attached with your at least one group. The job must be attached with the whatever group you have created there. If you don't attach, if you see, if you don't attach your what job with any group, then your dynamic mapping task will remain invalid. You can try this after this. Okay. Other things, yes. Everything is understood.
Yes.
Any doubt, Kamlindu, Shivangi, Sonvi, Parul, Anjali?
No, we will do practical, I said, for this, no? And then we will.
Yeah, so this is very important concept actually. I think in the migration we have not seen. See, anybody have seen this?
No.
Okay, so okay, so now let's run it. Okay, and let's see the result. You can see the 4 jobs started concurrently itself. So your individual job is playing the role like your individual mapping, correct? But are we developing this mapping separately? No. We are just creating the multiple jobs, and we are taking the benefit of reducing our development effort. So this is nothing but dynamic mapping task. So you can see the created tables also. So where I have created. So you can see these are our 4 tables get loaded. So all of you clear what exactly the dynamic mapping task?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you can go for it. Okay, I will post this presentation as well as I think you must have recorded this also. Kamlesh, you understood any